the reading Sexual Perversion by Thomas Nagel, Nagel addresses our perception of the concept of sexual perversions. He aims to tell us what about sexuality qualifies as perversions, and he challenges the idea in various ways. Nagel begins by saying that there is something to be learned about sex from the fact that we possess a concept of sexual perversion. He explains that if the concept of sexual perversion is at all viable, it must meet three general conditions. First, they have to be sexual desires or practices that can be plausibly described as in some sense unnatural, though the explanation of this natural-unnatural distinction is the main problem. The second principle is that if anything should be considered perversions, it would be practices such as shoe fetishism, bestiality, and sadism. Other practices, such as unadorned sexual intercourse, are, if anything, controversial, but do not qualify as sexual perversions. The third condition is that if there are any perversions, they will be unnatural sexual inclinations rather than merely unnatural practices adopted not from inclinations, but for other reasons. Nagel believed that the notion of viewing sexual desire as an appetite is no bar to admitting of perversions. Like hunger, sexual desire has, as its characteristic object, a certain relation with something in the external world, only in this case it is usually a person rather than an object. This relation, according to Nagel, is far more complicated. This added complication allows scope for correspondingly complicated perversions. Nagel believed that hunger is relevant to sexual appetite, considering they both serve a biological function as well as a significant role in our consciousness. Sexual desire is complicated enough without having to be linked to anything else as a condition for phenomenological analysis. It cannot be denied that sex may serve various functions, but it also has its own content as a relation between people. It is only by analyzing that relation, according to Nagel, that allows us to understand the conditions of sexual perversion. He believed that it was important that the object of sexual attraction is a particular individual who transcends the properties that make him or her attractive. Nagel's views on sexual perversion are based on an essay by philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre titled Being and Nothingness. Nagel admired Sartre's notion that the type of possession that is the object of sexual desire is carried out by what he calls a double reciprocal inclination. Nagel believed that sexual desire involves a kind of perception, but not merely a single perception of its object, for in the case of mutual desire, there is a complex system of superimposed mutual perceptions. These perceptions are of not only the sexual object, but also of oneself. The sexual awareness of another involves considerable self-awareness to begin with, more than is involved in ordinary sensory perception. This experience, according to Nagel, is felt in an assault of oneself by the view of the sexual object. Nagel believed that the cycle of sexual desire is a complex psychological interchange with clearly defined components. The first step of this cycle is the sensing of another person who you are aroused by. The next step is the other person seeing you. Then, you must sense the other person seeing you. Finally, the fourth and final step is the other person sensing you sensing them. The fourth step of this cycle is extremely significant for human beings. Non-human animals can have responses to stimulation, but this only goes so far. For humans, it is the continual reflection about what this actually means, the continual levels of reflection and recognition. The notion of desire is not merely the perception of a pre-existing embodiment of the other, but ideally a contribution to his further embodiment, which in turn enhances the original subject's sense of himself. This explains why it is so important that the partner is aroused by the awareness of the other person's mutual arousal. Nagel believed that all four stages are variations of identification between a person and their body. In the expression of sexual desire, the blending of involuntary response with deliberate control is extremely important. If a person is sexually desired by someone whom they do not sexually desire, this process does not move forward. This desire is an expansion of the subject's self through the realized embodiment of the other, which is, in turn, an embodiment of the subject. This system of distinct sexual perceptions and interactions is the basic framework for any full-fledged sexual relation. Relations that involve only part of this process, according to Nagel, are significantly incomplete. Now, back to the topic of perversion. Nagel believes that a variety of familiar deviations constitute curtailed versions of the sexual desire cycle. Certain narcissistic practices in intercourse with animals, infants, and inanimate objects are stuck at a primitive version of the first stage of this cycle. If the object is not alive, or cannot reciprocate one's feelings of arousal, this process does not and cannot move forward. Nagel says, what distinguishes the process of sexual attraction for humans is a psychological existential process. It isn't about the other party's physical features. It's all that, plus our recognition of their mutual attractiveness, which makes us human. Sexual acts such as sadism, masochism, bestiality, sex with inanimate objects, and sex with infants disrupts this cycle. Because they are unaware of our attraction and are incapable of exhibiting the same kind of psychological response, this goes beyond the bounds of the established roles of the cycle of sexual attractiveness. Nagel concludes by stating that while these perversions may go against our intuition, it doesn't mean that they are better or worse in quality, or that they are necessarily immoral. Thank you for watching.